Well, that was an awesome act to follow, and now here we are with our Female Innovators panel, and it is an absolute pleasure to welcome Devi, Amanda, and Nekeshia back to the Hilltop, all Georgetown alumni, to share their, Hoya Saxa, to share their remarkable journeys from their time here to the extraordinary careers that they've built today. Each of them has been a trailblazer, whether founding and leading innovative companies, making game-changing investments, or breaking barriers in new industries, all while leaving a lasting impact on the world. Their achievements serve as a powerful inspiration, particularly for young women and Georgetown women looking to carve their own paths in business and beyond. First, I'll introduce Amanda, who's a co-founder and partner of Able Partners. Amanda is a visionary early-stage investor and entrepreneur. She's co-founded Videolicious, which was later acquired by Squarespace, and was a founding partner of Capital Acquisition Corp, which became Two Harbors Investment Corp. She was a Truman Scholar and has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Amanda is deeply committed to philanthropy. She serves on the Melanoma Research Alliance Board and the Tech NYC Leadership Council.
And next, I will introduce Devi. As the founder and CEO of Ascend Now, Devi is revolutionizing education by helping students discover their purpose through social emotional learning and entrepreneurial education. A former Goldman Sachs investment banker, she studied philosophy and economics at Georgetown, where she developed a deep belief in Nietzsche's theory of eternal return. Now in its 7th year, Ascend Now has impacted over 100,000 students across 70-plus institutions worldwide. And last but certainly not least, Nekeshia, the managing partner at Parkway Venture Capital, is a strategic powerhouse leading Parkway Venture Capital with expertise in business expansion, digital efficiencies, and cost optimization. With experience spanning from Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, PwC, Booz to IBM, she has advised organizations of all sizes on their growth strategies. She previously led at Artivest, a fintech startup, and began her career in politics, serving in the White House and DHS. A former New York State Assembly candidate, she now plays an active role in the arts community as part of the Lincoln Center Young Patrons Steering Committee. Please join me in welcoming Amanda, Devi, and Nekeshia.
All right, so you've all taken bold risks, whether it was launching a new company or backing an unconventional founder, or betting on a market before it was really mainstream. Nekeshia, you've made several big career jumps from the White House to Wall Street to VC. I would love to start with you. What's a time that you took a risk that completely changed your trajectory?
Yeah, so for me, it was actually when I left government and moved into private sector. So high school, college, and even when I was interning at the White House, which was a little bit after college, I always thought I would have some sort of a career in government in some aspect, whether it's a company that's working with it or directly in. And when I was interning at the White House, they even, we had a lot of guest speakers come in, and they even said, you know, it's good to serve, and then it's good to go into the private sector and to continue to do both, because then you start to bring best practices back and forth, and you really start to think about public-private partnership and what that means for the US and improving it. And I thought that's what I would do, but then when I left the White House, I moved into IBM, and it was one of my last projects there where I really caught the bug of wanting to help grow businesses at every level. And from there, I stayed in private sector, and I just kept going. So I never actually went back to the government, and I did have that short run for state assembly, but it wasn't full time. So I think that's probably the most pivotal moment where I didn't follow the trajectory that I thought I was going to when I left the government.
Awesome. And Amanda or Devi, do you have any risks that you've taken that changed your trajectory?
I mean, I have a sort of similar story. I was here at the School of Foreign Service. I thought that would be my path. I spent a semester in Venezuela, and because I had Spanish on my resume, Merrill Lynch's Latin American investment banking group took my resume out and called me in for an interview. And I had been a White House intern. I had been working for my senator 2 years. I was a Truman Scholar. I thought that's what I was going to do. And I decided just on a lark to give it a chance. My friends, frankly, were just saying, you should try investment banking. It's a thing. And I spent the summer there, and I was so impressed with the pace of learning, which frankly felt much faster than government had, that I signed up to come back and thought it would also be a short-term thing, and have been in finance ever since.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of my, I guess, biggest risks was moving to Singapore 7 years ago. I didn't know anyone, and I started my company there. But for me, I guess, like, taking some of those impulsive risks has been really important, because sometimes you, in your gut, know something, but it might not be rational, right? So I grew up in Antwerp in Belgium and, attended Georgetown. While I was here, I was a TA, teaching assistant, for a lot of my classes. And in my senior year, I started my first company for college students to tutor other college students. And it grew. It wasn't meant to be an enterprise. It was mostly meant for me to pay off my student debt. I thereafter graduated. I joined Goldman Sachs for 3 years in New York in investment banking. I can't say I loved it. I thought the nature of the work wasn't super interesting. And after those 3 years, once I had completed paying my student debt, I said, I need to start something on my own. And I quite literally looked up the best education systems globally, and I read about Finland, I read about the US, and then I read about Singapore. And I said, ooh, in my 23-year-old brain, I'm now 31, in my 23-year-old brain, I was like, oh, let me move to Singapore and start a company. No business plan, no funding, no one I knew in Singapore. I mean, looking back, I sound like a totally crazy person. But I had this interest, and I said, you know what? If I start something in a country that already values education so deeply, then perhaps I can succeed globally. And now I'm based more in the US, and we've expanded. And so I think, I would encourage any female entrepreneur or male entrepreneur out there, like, take those risks, because in your 20s, taking risks is easy. In your 30s, maybe not as easy, right? So.
And before we jump to your question, I'm curious, was there a class that you TA'd at Georgetown that just was the worst to TA for?
Oh, the worst. Oh.
Or the best, I guess.
It's so funny you asked this, because on Monday, I'm actually teaching a lecture for the same class that I TA'd. It's called International Finance by Fuad Hassanov. I don't know if any of you take that class. But that really was transformative, because one, I loved the class, but then teaching it as a TA gave me such a new learning. Although I was teaching to other students, I was actually learning so much more about myself. I was learning about how to communicate messages. I remember I had this, Georgetown basketball student, who would come to my TA sessions, and he would really find them, I guess, useful, because he found learning in a lecture difficult. And that's when I said, education's really interesting, because that transfer of knowledge happens differently for every single person.
True.
And those skills, those soft skills, those life skills are really important to ingrain in our curriculum, I feel.
For sure. I think you have all said well that you've made different pivots throughout your career, but I think something that the three of you have held close to your heart is kind of the mission around whatever you're doing. So I'd like to start with you, Devi. In the past, you've mentioned that your motivation for founding Ascend Now was to cultivate joie de vivre, a joy for life, and joie de prendre, a love of learning in students in Singapore. This sentiment resonates quite a bit with the Jesuit ideal of cura personalis, or care for the whole person, which I find particularly compelling given your background at Georgetown. Given that you all attended Georgetown, how do you see cura personalis shaping the way you approach your relationships with customers or founders or coworkers? We'll start with you, Devi.
I love, cura personalities, but I would be lying if I said I truly understood it in my undergraduate years. Now, 10 years later, I do really understand it, I think. And I think it is this deep respect of understanding that we are so much more than what we do. We are so much more than what our occupation is, or who our family is, or who our spouse is. It's really so many facets to an individual, and like being boxed into one person is not conducive or successful for anyone, right? So, some examples of cura personalis, I guess, in my personal life, when I started my company, I have a fund where I fund students' ideas. And these are students that are 11 years old, or 15 years old, or 18 years old, because I want them to believe that age is just a number. And I think that making sure that that balance between brain, body, and mind is super, super critical in our day-to-day life. And I think it's one of the most beautiful tenets in Georgetown. I think it was with you, and you were having this conversation about the Georgetown culture, right? And it's really powerful, guys, because now that I'm on the board of the Barada Center of Excellence here at Georgetown, and I do speak to other universities, not a lot of universities have the culture that Georgetown has. I'll tell you that. I got my first job at Goldman Sachs because of a Hoya. And today, when any Hoya reaches out to me, I'm there. You know, the walls come down when you're a Hoya, I feel.
Yeah.
For sure.
Any other points on that?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. Our fund, we're very much focused on health and wellness, and our primary thesis that we invest under is something that we call the wellness gap, which we define as the disconnect between measures of economic well-being and measures of physical and emotional well-being. So through our investment, we're trying to close that gap, and so if we were not looking out for the founders and other partners in our ecosystem, trying to do the same for them personally, then we would be pretty inauthentic in what we were doing. And you know, I think that looks really different for different people and in different ways, but I think we have a reputation of, you know, everybody talks about supporting founders, everybody does it differently. I would say that most of our founders would say we might be the first call when they have something sensitive to share, and that could be anything from, you know, they didn't meet budget, their CFO keeps showing up drunk, or they don't know how to communicate that they're pregnant, which unfortunately has happened a couple of times.
There might be some stories there.
Definitely stories, but and we also encourage all of our founders. You know, founders have a much higher rate of mental health issues than the general public. Something like 70% is a number that you read. You know, it's a very high stress job. You're not sleeping a lot. You're under financial pressure. You're under pressure to be successful. So we encourage people to work with coaches or actually directly with mental health professionals. So that's sort of how we care for the whole person in our founder portfolio.
And I think from my perspective, we look at it in two different ways. So we look at what are we investing in and who are we investing in? And then we also look at it from the LP base. So from the investment perspective, we are a frontier technology and venture capital firm, which means we're typically investing in technology that's not mainstream yet. A lot of people don't really fully understand what the impact will be, but we do. We know what the impact will be in the business, we know what the impact will be personal life, we know with government, and so then that brings us to who are we investing in. And so we always try to make it a point to look at the founders and the founding team, and yes, they should be smart and they should be building something that there's a need for, but more importantly, we want them to be building something where they want to impact the world in a very positive way. And so by us doing that, looking at those two aspects, that kind of brings back to the cura personalis from me when looking at it from the investment. For example, we have a company in our portfolio called Sandbox AQ. They're doing a quantum computing. It's not computer, it's software, but what they're really trying to do is use large quantum models to put a digital twin of a human body, put billions of molecules in that human body and see what the adverse effects are to ultimately get to a drug that could help cure a disease that hasn't been cured yet. That does a lot for society by cutting down the cost of healthcare, by creating drugs that come to market sooner rather than later. So it's very important for us to be looking at technology and founders that are looking to do something like that. And then from the LP perspective, which I think sometimes is missed, I've had the privilege to be doing this now for 4 years, so not extremely long, but long enough to realize there's a gap in people who have access to really good fund managers. And what I've realized is there's a segment of colleges that have these great plans that want to do financial aid to anybody that actually qualifies for it, but part of the way to fund that is through your endowment. And in order to build that endowment, you've got to have good alternative investments. You have to have good access to private equity and venture fund managers. And so I've made it a point to start to reach out to some of these schools to kind of help further educate, because they do know about it, but further educate what that type of investment can do for the endowment and then how it helps them achieve their operational goals. And then also what it can do just long-term for other goals that they have. So I look at it from those two perspectives.
Awesome. I'm going to direct the next question to Amanda. So Able Partners has made direct investments into the mental health sector. As tech moves deeper into the mental health space with AI therapists and digital wellness tools, where do you see the biggest opportunities, and where does innovation cross the line into something that makes you hesitate ethically as an investor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to recognize is we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. So we do not have the resources to address the mental health issues that are happening in our country right now. There's something like 75% of rural counties in the United States do not have a single mental health care provider. I grew up in a rural county, so that speaks to me particularly. So we need to look at technology as a way to enable better access, affordability, and effectiveness of our mental health care system. And when we look at investing in digital tools, whether that's AI or others, we think that the biggest opportunity is not in replacing providers, but in supporting those providers. And that can be in helping them with things like charting, helping them with care navigation, decision support tools, all of the things that help them see more patients, help them see the patients more effectively, and hopefully prevent burnout, which is a big problem in all of our medical system right now in terms of providers. So I think there's a really big opportunity for technology to support there. We've already seen many of the telemedicine companies helping. One of our companies, Spring Health, is providing something called precision psychiatry. And so they are able to better match patients with treatments that are more likely to work better on the first try, which not only improves patient outcomes, but also reduces costs to the system. On the other hand, of course, there's things that we need to worry about. Transparency is incredibly important. When we're looking at AI algorithms, it's different than a typical medical intervention because it changes over time. So what does it look like to approve and regulate something that's going to be different from patient to patient? I think there are still a lot of questions, but ultimately, when we're making an investment in the healthcare space, we're always looking that the incentives of the company should be aligned with the incentives of the patient. And when you saw some of these big flameouts in the digital healthcare sector recently, I think at times it was because the company's ultimate revenue outcome was not tied to the patient's best interest. So their revenues were tied to pushing medications that may or may not have been appropriate for the patients. So that's one way that we try to avoid investing in companies like that.
Super interesting. And I do want to double click on one of the portfolio companies, Aura, that you were an early investor in, which is now valued at over like $5 billion. And they just recently did that partnership. Anyone else wearing an Aura ring right now? They're probably, yeah, see?
Oh.
Awesome.
Only one, come on guys.
Come on.
Best tracker out there.
But their recent partnership with Dexcom and now doing glucose monitoring, how do you kind of see this partnership and Aura's place in the market shifting and also aligning with Able Partners' focus on positive living?
So, Aura was always aligned with our thesis on positive living because it's taking data and giving customers information to take proactive control of their own healthcare, and that's really core to what we do. Their metabolic health has been in the news a lot lately with the rise of GLP-1s, the Ozempics and the Mounjaros. But really, metabolic health is how our body takes food and converts that to energy. It's important for every system in your body. So it's an incredibly important thing. And to be able to integrate data from a continuous glucose monitor into the other metrics that you're getting, like heart rate variability, heart rate, temperature sensors, all the things that your Oura Ring gives you, is really the direction that we think that this measurement and monitoring is moving in the healthcare world from being sort of an isolated metric to being a platform where you have many different biometrics that are being tracked and therefore giving personal recommendations and tools to people to take, again, proactive control of your own health. Because unfortunately, our healthcare system is not delivering right now for many people.
Yeah.
Got it. I'd like to kind of go along the same lines of the ideas of AI and technology advancements. I had a question for you, Nekeshia. With the rise of AI regulations, how do you see emerging technologies and regulations impacting the startup landscape? Specifically at Parkway VC, you are focused on deep tech, which is not industry-based, but rather driven by technology advancements. Do you see increasing regulation as a major roadblock for deep tech startups specifically?
Yeah, so I guess we could take that question twofold. From kind of a general regulation, AI regulation, I think if we start to over-regulate, we start to suppress the number of new ideas that become good companies, and then that actually produces great products and services. And then if we look further down the line, does it then almost prevent the creation of that next new company, great product, great service, if the first founder wasn't able to create to begin with? And I think one easy example of that is if we look at PayPal. So when PayPal was created and as it was getting going, a lot of the states were trying to regulate it as a bank and throw other large regulations around it. And if that had actually worked, would Cash App exist? Would YouTube exist? Would LinkedIn exist? Would SpaceX exist? We could go on and on and on. We know the powerhouse founders that came from PayPal. So when you think of over-regulating, you also just have to think about what are we actually limiting by making sure, by creating these regulations that may be doing more than what we actually need them to do. And then I think from a deep tech perspective, it's a good time to actually look at EU and AI regulations. And I know we were just talking about this and the discussions that are happening here in the US. We all know that the EU tends to be more prone to regulate their industries. And so we tend to see less new companies and innovation come out. We do see it, but it tends to be less than anywhere, or the US in particular. So if we look at what they're doing and then we look at the deep tech space, kind of specifically, we take the 3 models of open source, multimodal models, and frontier models. So open source model, you guys are probably all familiar with, where coding is accessible, data is accessible, developers come in, they code, they create, they build on it. It's kind of the lifeline, right? And then you have the multimodal, which uses text to image to speech. A lot of startups are using that now, as we can see with ChatGPT. And then you have frontier, which does text and multimodal. So if we start to regulate, for example, open source, where things are free, it is extremely expensive now to build and create new data sets and new algorithms and new code. So if we go down the AI stack and we start with the bottom, which is the compute power, that's a partnership with Oracle or Microsoft. And then we look at the cloud, and if what you're building is large, you can't just do kind of an AWS or a Microsoft subscription model. You need more cloud set aside, which becomes expensive, and I know you were talking about the cloud earlier. And then on top of that, you think of the infrastructure. And then on top of that, you finally get to the application, which is what everyone uses. But if you start regulating that, and things are no longer free and open for developers to use, and people have to start paying and buying, and it gets very expensive, what are you suppressing? And kind of the same with the multimodal viewpoint. So if you think about, we actually have a portfolio company right now that is building a humanoid robot. And you have a lot of companies that are doing this multimodal model, and they are self-funded, but they're self-funded in the beginning because they have access to people like Elon Musk and lots of money in Silicon Valley or elsewhere to help them get off the ground and start and build. And it's not just a lot of money, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you start to regulate the use and the analysis and the access to data, and I'm not saying no regulation, but if you over-regulate it and you think of the multimodal aspect, then what about the future? So this humanoid robot that will eventually be in homes, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, but if we're regulating that data and how we analyze it and use it and what we can and can't do, if we're over-regulating it, how do we create for the future? How do we think about that? And so I think while regulations are good, everyone wants their privacy protected. We have to just make sure the right people are in the room as they're being developed to make sure we don't stymie ideas and new companies and new products and new technology.
I'm just curious, what is the company building this humanoid robot that's going to be in my home? And what's the use case there?
So it's actually out right now. It's being used in manufacturing and BMW. Okay. It's called Figure AI. And so I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but if not, you definitely should look it up. Yep. But it just released a video yesterday of it being tested in kind of a home test case of putting groceries away without being prompted. It uses neural learning, which is just you learn by watching.
Very cool.
It doesn't have to be prompted.
Yeah, I need that.
Perfect. And Devi, do you have anything to add with the kind of AI regulation potentially in the education sphere as well?
Yeah, I think that when we look at education, I think there's sort of 2 arenas that maybe we should double click on in terms of curriculum. I think one is softer skills that potentially AI can't replicate. We did a survey with, I think it was 50,000 students in high school, and we asked them who's comfortable with the skill networking. And I think we got a 3% response rate.
Wow.
So that just goes to show, right? These are not skills we're learning in school. So one of the things, we do at Ascend now is we teach financial literacy, soft skills, resilience, grit, but we do it via teenagers. So let's say you want to learn grit, you will learn from a teenager talking about Michael Jordan not making his high school basketball team. So cool, quirky, for people that would really short attention spans or ADHD like myself. And I think so that piece is really important. On the AI regulations, I'm less familiar with that piece, but I think what's really important is also how we interpret AI and having AI interpretation tracks and courses on how to understand AI, because it's been thrown around everywhere. And so I think we as a society also need some time to digest what it's really doing. And from an education standpoint, most teachers will say we don't have time for AI or we don't have time in our timetable. But I think that we're not speaking to each other as different industries. I mean, teachers, policymakers, corporates, founders, VCs that are, investing in amazing businesses like you two. Like, we all need to come together and talk to each other and integrate that in the curriculum. I mean, just to give you guys an example, there's a curriculum called the IB, the International Baccalaureate. They change curriculum, like they recycle curriculum every 6 to 17 years. Which is not fast enough, right? If you think about it, I don't know about the advanced placement, but I'm not sure how quickly they change curriculum, right? But I think we just need to really deeply think about what are those skills that are really important to teach? What are some things that you guys wish you learned when you were in K-12, in middle and high school? That's something I really do deeply care about, because when I graduated high school, I felt very unprepared for life. And so I just want to pay that legacy forward for the next generation.
Very cool.
And Devi, I have a follow-up question for you, about your story, moving to Singapore. That's obviously a country that, values education in a very special way. And I'd love to hear about what you learned, now that you're doing a lot of work in the US. What have you learned about adapting a disruptive business model from one country to another, different cultures and markets?
Yeah, Keisha and I were just talking about that. I mean, look, it's not easy. In Asia, there's a different, I guess, value placed on education in some respects, on academic education. When it comes to skill education or entrepreneurial education, a lot of Asian families don't regard that as important. What I love about the US is that most states have something mandatory called social emotional learning, which fits in exactly with what we do. And I think that the US definitely values that piece a lot more than in Asia. But yeah, cultural differences, I mean, cultural appreciation, that's one of our skills, one of our modules. I think it's important because culturally there's so many differences, right? And it's not so easy as you expand from country to country to just plug and play the models. Probably you guys see this with founders. It can drive you nuts because every way is different, rules are different, policies are different, right? Hiring is different. But it's great learning for sure. And I think, if anyone here is, looking to start a business and then open up another arm in another country, don't expect it to be like a plug and play, That's just a tip. It will be very different, most likely, unless it's like a very similar geography with similar laws, I would say. But it's a good learning as a founder. I think as a founder, you're always learning. You're always failing. That's non-negotiable. You're always repeating, rinsing, reapplying. I mean, it's my 7th year as a founder. I joke that it's like my 40th because it feels so long. But it's fun. It's rewarding. It's fun. It's exciting. But like coming to Amanda's point on like mental health, as a founder, it takes a toll. You're kind of always switched on, and it's really important to like balance that.
Very nice. And I think, Amanda, having been a founder and an investor now, you co-founded into Videolicious, which was later acquired by Squarespace, and you were a founding partner of Capital Acquisition Corporation, which completed a $265 million IPO and evolved into Two Harbors Investment Corporation. How have these experiences in both building and acquiring shaped your perspective as an investor?
Yeah, I mean, I think having sat on both sides of the table, I started out in investing, thought I wanted to focus on one business, so did that for a while and eventually realized I wanted more of a portfolio approach. But having sat on both sides of the table has been incredibly useful. I think it is really hard to understand what a founder's going through without having run your own business. So everything from the day-to-day operations of a company, budgeting, management, all of the things that you go through. And frankly, you just develop so much more empathy for founders. I will never take a meeting with a founder that I don't have at least some remote possibility of potentially funding because I had so many informational meetings that were really a waste of time. Things like that. When I pass on a business, I try to give actual feedback. I think that can be tricky. I think a lot of people don't want to offend or say something that's not positive to a founder. But if I can give them something for the time they've given me, I try to do that. So it certainly built my empathy for founders. And then in terms of like practical skill sets, having been through both an M&A and an IPO process, understanding exit dynamics, what it takes to make a strategic partnership work, the nitty-gritty of an IPO process, what it takes to be a successful company in the public markets, all of that's very helpful because ultimately, even though we're investing at the earliest stages, that is the ultimate goal for most, if not all of our companies that we're investing in. So it was incredibly useful that way.
Very cool.
Excellent. So Amanda and Nekeshia, as VCs, do you ever feel pressured to adapt your investment strategy as a response to a rise in growth equity in the market? Are you shifting focus to earlier stage deals or structuring investments in your portfolio any differently?
Yes, I'll take it first. So I think it's interesting what's been happening, what we've been seeing. The rounds are getting larger at earlier rounds. So even if you take like a Series C, it's now easily at hundreds of millions of dollars, whereas before it was not. You could kind of say Series C was still a little bit on the earlier stage and was moving into growth, but now it can definitely be growth. But for us, we actually are early stage investors. And when I say early stage, I mean Series A. So our investment strategy has kind of been tried and true. We don't change our investment strategy based on what's happening in the market. So we start with Series A, and we follow our companies through all the way through growth equity. So for us, it works that rounds are getting larger sooner, just because of where we start. But yeah, we are kind of sticking to our strategy right now.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, we are investing pre-seed through Series A and then following along. So for us, if anything, the rise of growth equity has been helpful because we have more funding sources for our companies earlier on. So, strategically, we try to maintain those relationships so we can be helpful in the fundraising process. I also think, growth equity is not just focused on growth. They tend to be very focused on unit economics and building sustainable businesses. So to the extent that that trickles downwards, I think it's helpful. But ultimately, we're not market reactive. We're very thesis driven in our approach. So it hasn't changed much about the way we invest.
Awesome. And maybe from the founder's perspective, Devi, has this shift at all helped change the way that you think about the types of investors that you want at different stages of growth at Ascend now?
So we've been bootstrapped. I mean, we started off bootstrapped for the first 4 years. 2.5 years ago, we raised a small amount of money from strategic investors, predominantly school owners in Southeast Asia and the UK. And since then, we haven't raised. And I think, it's funny now that you guys are speaking, like I wish I had met you guys back in the day, because it's not easy to find investors that have the founder empathy that you are speaking about. It's really not easy, and I think just if you guys do raise in the future for your businesses, just be cautious with who you raise from, because it is a very long-term journey, and it's kind of like, in a way, a marriage, right? People compare it to a marriage or a partner, and so you have to choose the right investors. We've been lucky. We've chosen really long-term investors that believe in our growth journey. And most of the time when we speak to them, it's always a fire or a problem or something negative. And those are the people you need. You don't need to call them and say, "Oh, all this great stuff is happening," right? You need a lifeline. And those are the type of investors that I think you should do your due diligence. A lot of people say this, but like when you're pitching your business, a lot of people just go with any investor. Do your due diligence on them as they would on you. They're your long-term partners, and it's really important. I decided not to go, the Series A, B, C, D round, because I also know myself as an entrepreneur, and I wouldn't be okay raising 100 million and sleeping at night. I just wouldn't, and that's okay as well, right? So there's some businesses that are not necessarily necessitate VC backing, and that's also okay. Right? So I think having that, and I didn't know that 7 years ago, and we had, the opportunity, we were part of the Sequoia Capital Spark Fellowship, where they grant you 100,000 equity-free grant. This was like 5 years ago, and we had the opportunity to raise from Sequoia, and I remember thinking, it's such a flashy name, right? Like, we should do it. But then I remember sitting down with one of the partners there, and I said, I don't know if I can be that founder that, gets so much cash and is answerable to, I value my freedom. I respect people that can do that, but it's just not who I am.
I think that's such an important point. We spend a lot of time talking about how venture is not the right source of funding for a lot of businesses, and it can be destructive if it isn't the right source of funding for you. I think it takes a lot of understanding to pass it up when it's offered to you, but it absolutely is not the right source of funding for probably the majority of businesses.
Yeah. I will say, to your point, there was an investor and founder that there ended up being a deal done post-conference last year. It's not it's all about building relationships here at the Venture and the Capital Summit. So that's a pretty fun anecdote, but I'll let you move.
For sure. Moving in a little bit of a different direction. In a different funds report, Georgetown University is the second best university in graduating women who lead venture capital firms. However, according to World Economic Forum, women-founded startups accounted for 2% or less of venture capital funding invested in Europe and the United States in 2023, according to PitchBook. As a female innovators within the startup ecosystem, the conversation often centers around the challenges we face as women in these traditionally male-dominated industries. I'd like to shift the focus and ask instead, how has being a woman served as an advantage in your career?
So that's a good question. I feel like the question is usually the opposite.
Yeah.
What struggles and challenges have you had to deal with? So I guess I'll start. So for me, I think it really boils down to your intuition. And a woman's intuition is usually 99.9% of the time accurate. And when I say intuition, I mean really honing in on your EQ and being able to read the room, read a conversation, read not just interactions, but body language. All of that plays a role with your day-to-day at work, and even your personal life. But I think through my career, I have leaned on that when I didn't necessarily have immediate access to a mentor or someone to talk to about a situation that was happening at work at every stage in my career. And I always kind of leaned on my gut and my intuition and went with that. And when I listened to it, it was right. So
Yeah,
that's what
trust your gut.
I mean, I think as an investor, because I have a different set of experiences and frankly biases than the majority of, the numbers, I think the numbers are 2% for solely female-founded companies. It's like 12% for mixed gender teams. Still not great. It doesn't look so different on the venture partner side, the people who are writing the checks. And so I think having that different experience, as sort of Keith was talking about just prior to our talk, you can take counter-consensual judgments, and oftentimes that will work in your favor. So I think that I understand pain points and market sizing in a way that the traditional venture investor often underestimates. I think I understand pattern matching and what makes a successful female entrepreneur better than many of my male colleagues do. And just a couple of examples, we were early investors in Daily Harvest, the frozen meal delivery company. And when Rachel Jory was raising, she was 8 months pregnant, raising her seed. Her numbers were fantastic. She's fantastic. And we committed, and many of the male investors I knew had passed. And when I called them up to talk about what their reasoning was, everybody was really uncomfortable with her pregnancy. And they failed to see that she already had a child. She knew what she was getting into. And she was running through walls, and she was 8 months pregnant. And frankly, that is a great signal. So their loss, our gain. And one of the areas that we have been focused on is aging women's health and wellness. And most venture investors, up until very recently, have been allergic to the word menopause, and I understand it's not sexy. But our company, Midi Health, has been doing extremely well, and now people are paying attention. But I think that's a market that, as a woman, I can understand better.
Absolutely.
I would say, similar to Keisha, I think women have this deep care when it comes to working with people, and that empathy that they understand and feel other people maybe a bit easier than men would. I think it's funny, when you asked this question, I thought of a funny story. I think as a woman, sometimes the expectation can be so low that you just surprise people, right? Today, just an hour ago, someone came to me and was like, "You're a student, right? You're looking for an internship." I'm like, something like that. Right? So it's just I think as the expectation again hasn't changed dramatically, I would say. There's still, even when I worked at Goldman Sachs, it was the intern class was 20 people in my group, and there were 3 women. And then when I worked there as an analyst for 3 years, it was out of all I think we had 7 analysts, there were 2 women. So we are always the minority, not always, but in some industries we're the minority, and so it's not so hard to surprise people, I guess. I've learned to take it positively. I think sometimes, as a woman, you get told these things. When I moved to Singapore, I remember I was trying to get a work pass to stay there, and I went, I tried to do it myself first because I didn't want to spend money, and it didn't work, so I had to hire someone. So I went to this company, And there was this lady in front of me, and she was like, oh, why are you starting a business in Singapore? Have you found love? And you just need to keep yourself busy for like 4 hours. And the way she said that to me was like so sort of, it felt very condescending in the moment, and so it's just funny. I think like as a woman, you kind of take it with a grain of salt and you move on, right? I think that deep care and deep understanding of people is really one of our strengths, even when it comes to like customer service. I mean, my company has 2 businesses. One is like one-on-one personalized learning, and we have a customer success team there, and it's all women. And we've had in the last 6 years, maybe 3 complaints from our students and families. So that just goes to show, and when we had a few men in that team, it didn't work out. So I think, we have a lot of strengths, and we should use them.
I completely agree.
Those are awesome answers. I mean, I don't know if I could have imagined better answers, but I will ask another question, a bit unconventional, but what if you could give yourself a totally unconventional piece of advice, something I couldn't get from anyone else in any like business or life advice book, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question.
So I'll start. So throughout my career and personal life, if I got this advice right when it started, I would say walk with faith. Like constantly, every time, at any point in my career, at any point in my life where there's been doubt or hesitation or positive things, my journey with faith has always kind of helped me and guided me through it and to the next point. So that would be the advice I'd give to my younger self.
Love that.
I mean, I guess I would say follow your interests that are not job related, and they can end up really helping out in your job. You know, for me, I think when I followed things that I were interested in that were not connected to my work currently, so I was working at a hedge fund, and following my interests ended up at capital acquisition. You know, even when I was doing Videolicious, I'm very committed there, but realizing that I was loving consumer investing, staying engaged on the side there, ended up launching my fund. So sort of throughout your career, one of the big areas that I focused on within mental health was therapeutic psychedelics. When I started looking at it in 2017, it was really the domain of, hippies and dropouts, and nobody understood what I was doing. But I just found the science fascinating, and, eventually it became a big industry. So even where things aren't, connected directly to what seems like the right path, it might not be conventional advice, but I found it very helpful.
I feel like mine's not unconventional either, but I would say spend time with yourself. Like spend time in solitude so you can figure out and learn about yourself. Learning about yourself is like such a never-ending journey, and I think sometimes we're so bogged down with what we do and who we're with and our friends and family that we forget to give ourselves that love. And I know this is so Gen Z and cliche. I'm not even Gen Z, by the way, but like loving yourself is indeed very, very important, and it takes a lot of time to get there. Frankly, for me, it's like this year I started to love myself. So 31 years till I got there. So I think that's really, really important, and just appreciating what you do and celebrating the little wins, but also celebrating the failures, because through that you learn, right? So I think that's what I would say. And I know it sounds much easier than it is, like spending time in solitude, but just figuring out what you want to do and why, and not always being, I think we're slaves to our technology, like Slack, emails, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of that. Like we always give time to others, right? But also giving time to ourselves.
Awesome.
And I believe Dev and I are definitely grateful to have you all here today, and in some ways see you all as role models to us being undergraduate females in the business world. So I was wondering if you could each tell us a female role model that inspired you most throughout your life.
I won't make you start again. I don't have like one role model. I kind of always,
okay.
I wanted one. I wanted to understand how people got there. But I really have, I've been lucky that I've had so many wonderful women in my life who I've learned from and have inspired me. From my mother, who always believed that hard work would solve any problem, to Karen Benke, the founder of Juice Beauty, one of the first companies I got involved in, who was the one who taught me to stay engaged with your passion and see where that leads you. My partner today, Lisa Blau, who shows me how you can do well by doing good with all of her engagement in politics. And as I was just saying backstage, the wonderful female VC community in New York City, which has really just been so supportive to be a part of it. So I find inspiration from all of those people.
Awesome.
Very nice.
I'd say probably my mom. Growing up, I was never really close to either my mom or dad. Of course, I love them dearly, but I didn't have like that best friend relationship with either. But recently, like maybe 3-4 years ago, I started getting extremely close to my mom. She's become my best friend, and I've learned so much from her. She's like, she's still working. She, was a Forex banker, trader, and she runs the house. She does everything, and I'm like, look at her sometimes like, whoa, like, are you Superwoman? Like, and she really makes me believe that you can be that person, I guess, like such a selfless creature full of kindness and warmth and love, and really not like a mean bone in her body. So I do really look up to her, and she provides me that support. Even just being around her without even speaking, like I just instantly feel uplifted, like I can do anything. So I would say my mom.
Yeah, I would say the same. It was hands down my mom. Just being younger, she always said, don't ever let anybody tell you no if it's something you want to do. And there's always exceptions. So if you're going after a job and they say, we're not hiring, or this isn't the right role, or whatever it is, and that's what you want, there's always exceptions to the rule. And you should always kind of persevere from that perspective. And so that still is very much instilled in me. And frankly, is the reason why I am and where I've gotten today is my mom. My dad, too, if you're listening. You have to throw that out there. Yes, daddy, too. But it's really been my mom.
Awesome. Well, I cannot thank you all enough for joining us on stage today. The moral of this story is that Hoya women can do anything, and so can Hoya moms. And, I'll just, woo. And then I just want to thank you guys again, Devi, Amanda, Nekeshia. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.